to love relationship. That's the other thing I took a polygraph on. Right? You know, the woman who I wish only good to, and I would meet with Luke at any time. If you wind up being the facilitator of it, at any time, in any place, I will meet with in a facilitated context to bring you into this. You know, but basically, you know, she wrote me a letter after the relationship was over, describing it as the most beautiful relationship, describing me as, you know, and her to me and me to her as our really true love, which is completely the opposite of the description, and this is all polygraphed, right, in which it's re-remembered as this abusive, coercive, horrible story. And actually, I read once your story, you know, which is this woman's, you know, as it were, story on the web. I threw up. I literally don't know how I felt in one first person. Yeah. I literally went to the bathroom and threw up. I was so completely disgusted by the story. And I was also filled with rage. You know, rage because it felt like, and if I can borrow Dennis Prager's term, it felt like a form of name rape.
Yeah.
You know, in other words, and at the time, I was too naive to think, well, what can I do about this? Right? What can I do? I got sick to my stomach. And I didn't occur to me, I didn't remember that, you know, because it was 25 years ago then. I didn't remember. I remembered it only like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. I remembered, oh, she wrote me a letter afterwards. And if you know the way polygraph works, you can't polygraph on something that's subjective. You have to polygraph on a fact.
Yeah.
Right? So thank God I was able to remember this fact, which was a letter with specific content, which, you know, which is very polygraphable. And the polygraph, of course, completely supports, you know, the truth of what I'm saying. But at that time, it was just devastating. It was just a devastating experience. And so, you know, so this woman's sister had written Michael saying there's this story in Gafni that's about to break. And I'm like, what? I'm like in the middle of my life. You know, something that happened 30 years ago, you know, that happened, you know, it was edgy, maybe even inappropriate, but nothing pathological about it, nothing abusive about it. Right? I mean, I know dozens and dozens of people who have been in relationships like that. We were both deeply in love with each other. Right? The letter validates that. It was her experience at the time as well as mine. Right? Do I regret it now? I actually do. You know, one of the things I understand now that I didn't understand then as a kid was that a young woman, you know, may actually be engaging because she wants to make the man happy, and maybe actually having, you know, a negative internal experience. I didn't understand that split then. She didn't give me any indication at all of that split, not one word. You know, so would I do it again? Of course not. You know, would I teach young men, you know, to behave differently in that situation from what I learned? Of course I would. But between that and re-raising it and trying to wreck someone's life with it, you know, 30 years later, there's a long, long distance. You know, and so I think what I did then, if I remember, is I called Gary. I called Gary Rosenblatt. And, you know, I went to meet him. And we had a several-hour meeting, which I'm sure he recorded. Gary, you're listening. I'm sure you recorded. And in that meeting, you know, I didn't know Gary. You know, I certainly didn't feel safe talking to Gary. I think that would be a major and understatement. He didn't seem to be kind of, you know, holding my interest at heart or healing. You know, he seems to be kind of looking for a kind of, sexy story. You know, and so, you know, he asked me at the time, I remember, you know, something like, you know, have you had, you know, affairs or this or that? And I said no, which wasn't true. You know, I have had a bohemian lifestyle. That didn't seem to be appropriate to share that with Gary. Right? You know, why would I do that? And I told him completely the truth, right, of this early story. I don't think that he believed me. Now I have a polygraph to support it, but you know, I didn't then. And there was a second story. You know, that was actually the source story. That story as well, you know, is, you know, on your web thing. Right? I think you haven't done the world a service in doing that, but I'll get back to that in a second. Right? That story as well I polygraphed, right, because I was able to remember a very specific, clear fact, right, which is the woman in question, you know, very much actively engaged me and asked me to fully sleep with her, and I said no. That would be true. That's completely opposite of the story's description, right? And that's also validated by polygraph. Right? I feel in the second story, so the second story on the web as well, right, is completely distorted in tone and substance. It's also validated by polygraph, you know, and but I wasn't fully transparent with Gary, right, about, you know, what actually did transpire and how it played, and that was a mistake, you know, and The reason that happened was very simple. When it first took place, immediately her advisor, brought her to this particular rabbi, who, held less than my, ennobled self-interest, in mind. And I called a very close friend, again, no names here, who was, a significant figure, a woman in the community, who still is. And I said, this is what actually happened. Very, very limited. It's gotten, within 2 days, blown up into, through the prism, of this rabbi. It became this kind of huge, archetypal, original sin story, which is just not what it was. The woman was strongly encouraged, to kind of, I was in my youth then, she was 16. She was strongly encouraged to kind of, blow the story up, right? I feel the story was a mistake, that any encounter with her at all was a mistake. I take responsibility for that mistake. But I didn't know how to do that when I was 24 because I was massively attacked, and it was blown so out of proportion it seemed there was no one to talk to who wanted to actually, okay, we made a mistake, let's heal this. It was a one-time mistake for like several minutes, right? Pathology would mean, well, let's do this for a year. Let's get 10 other people, right? Now, there's a very, very limited, right, mistake, but clearly it was a mistake. I own the mistake. And the advice that I received at the time, again, I'm not passing off my responsibility to the advice, but the advice I received very strongly from a very strong kind of older sister person was, she called the rabbi in question who was moving the story forward, and she called me back and said, listen, this man does not have your self-interest in mind at all. He's not interested in healing. Right? He and his partner feel very, very negatively about you. This is more of a pretext issue. The only thing you can do is just move on. Just don't engage this, move on, which is what I did, and which I did consistently for 25 years. And so, when a group of people went to support me, right, in a public letter, right, what I said to them, which was fully accurate, they haven't been in touch with me for a couple of years, and my guess is that we won't be in touch in the next several decades, right? But what I said to them is actually fully accurate, which is that, the stories in the web weren't true. One was completely not true. And the second story was fundamentally not true. But I didn't own that there was, any encounter at all, which I should have. Everything I say to you, now, I am subject to complete polygraph support. Every single word. There's some of this has already been polygraphed. The key facts here have all been polygraphed already by the best international person in polygraph. But if there's any fact that anyone would want to polygraph, right, at any recognized expert, I'll do it in 1 second. This is all absolutely, 1,000% true, and supportable. So as years went on, when I actually founded my organization in Israel, there were 2 board members, 2 women on my board, who I again consulted with about this issue, because it was re-raised, who advised me that I had done the only sensible thing I could do, given the fact that these women had now affiliated themselves with Vicky Pollan, right? And Vicky Pollan actually claims to be their therapist, right? So, to be kind of with great, respect for everyone, but Vicky Pollan, right, who says she sacrificed and murdered babies on an Oprah in 1989, right, and has made up, just this large series of things which seem to be, more than utterly fantastic. There's the large Jewish satanic cult, in the country, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is now saying that she's the therapist to these people. So, to say the least, that didn't make us feel like there was an open field for conversation, right? It made us feel like, oh my God, there's just no one to talk to. There's no possibility of healing. No one's interested in actually doing a deep healing and moving forward. I tried to actually make contact with one of the people and create a healing, but it was rejected. And so both of these people advised me, very, very strongly, that I was doing the only appropriate thing that could possibly be done, right? Which is what I did. In retrospect, I should have been, more transparent on that one issue. It wasn't something that seemed possible then. The best advice I got said not to do it. And ultimately, people who give us advice aren't responsible for what we do. We are. And so I take responsibility for that. What I fully and utterly reject is the pathologizing. There is no pathology here. I've worked in the last years with 4 great people in this field. Each one with, super, credibility and credentials, and try to really work through this again. And, and it's